Alright, so we're going to take a look at specular hits, and I'm going to drop this back down because I'm not worried about it being blurry. We're just really playing around trying to see where we're at. So I'll bring that back down to 2. I'm going to take my specular down to 0, and this is indirect specular. So again, we have this render that just shows the specular, and we take another render, when we put our specular bounces, our indirect, down to 0, even though we do have indirect specular hits, the image is getting darker because we're not having those rays bounce. So we're not getting a second bounce. So let's bring this all down and actually just save this real quick so we can compare and then take a look again. So we will get our specular hits, but what we're adjusting here is our indirect. And this will be clearer when we start looking at metals. So taking this down with metal would be a little bit clearer. Okay, so we're in 3ds Max, and I have the same scene. I just put a colored ball here. We're going to take a look at specular, and one of the better ways to do that is with metal. So I'm going to open up my renderer real quickly. In my production renderer, we're going to make our adjustments. And what I'm going to do is go in my material editor and just change this material to be a metal material. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and go down to our transmission and change that back to 0. And with my advanced, under specular reflections, I'm going to change the advanced metalness to 1. And do a quick render. And now you'll see I'm getting that metal look. So I'm just going to cancel this real quick because I do want to go in and make changes to this. But that's all I'm doing with the material right now. So I want to change the angle of this. And when we have at this angle like we did, you'll see that there's no transparency anymore. But I want to change the angle so we get just a reflection of the ball in the surface. So let's zoom in a bit, take a render. So I had this set up for glass, and I'm just going to make changes. I'm just going to bring this back to default. You can right click on it and set to default if you want. I don't need all of these ray bounces. I don't have the transparency. When you do a render now, you see it renders a little quicker, and we just don't need that hit. So I'm just going to cancel this, and I can bring this down further because I know I have no transmission. So I'm going to bring this back down to default, and I can bring this down to 4. I again have my limit set pretty high. I can lower this, just count what I need, but we're going to be looking at our specular. So we're going to take both of these down to 0 and do a render real quick, and let's just save this. Even though it's not a full render, you'll see the difference. So when I take my render, I do have my specular light hitting. So again, we have that same studio lighting, and we can see it on the ball. And here we can see the specular hit. So we have our speck on the surface up on the rim, but we don't have any reflection. And we're not getting that because we don't have our specular. And with this specular, again, it's not our direct specular. It's our indirect specular. So let's take this and go up to 2 bounces. And again, we're not getting our rays, so we're going to have to turn our rays on. So that's the final render. We're going to put that to the side as a copy. And now we're going to increase by 1 our ray bounce. And when we increase this, now you'll see we're getting a lot of black. Here we're getting less black. So we have the glasses reflecting each other, and we just don't have enough ray bounces to draw in the full reflection. So let's bring this up. We'll bring it up to, let's bring it up to 4 real quickly. And now you'll see with our first render, we didn't have enough bounces to fill in the black, but now with this one we're able to get enough bounces where the light hits an object, we get the reflection, we get the bounce back. So now we can, we're getting more. Again, this is how many rays, or excuse me, how many samples are coming out of each pixel, and then how many times it's bouncing. So let's just go up on both of these. I'll do 5 and 5 real quick. And this is something you just have to play with. Just find what your sweet spot is. So I'm at 5 and 5, and I'm getting a lot more light inside the goblet. We'll hang on to this one. And you really want to keep your quality down and do tests and see how many bounces you really need. So is this too much? I might bring this down and look at it. So bring it down to 3. And I'm just going to bring down my rays again to 3. Now we're getting much darker render, so I don't have enough rays inside. Okay, so here I have 2 renders. This render, I have it set for specular at 3 samples and 3 ray depth, and here I have it set for 5 and 5. So one of the things you have to look at is, how much noise do we have in our spec in comparison? And then the other is, so up here we have a lot more noise. And the other is, do we have enough bounces to fill in the black? So I have 5 and 5, I have 3 and 3, and I'm going to just put these down here and do another render. To save time, I am going to, for the tutorial, cut out these renders, but as I raise this up, they're going to get really long. Okay, so I have my specular sample set for 8 and my ray depth set for 5. I do have some black that if I raise the ray depth I might get rid of, but for this it works fine. I don't really have too much in my environment. It could be the studio lighting. So we're getting a much smoother quality in my spec. So if we look at these two, you can see the smoothness, and that's really our samples. So this is what you have to do. You have to just keep playing, going back and forth and seeing what you need your levels set for. Because I'm not really doing a finished render, once I get to the point where I can see the area, I can stop. You can also set up to do an active shade or an active region when you're doing your renders. So if I'm getting really high, I can click and drag out an active region. So we're going to just drag our region down, scoot it over, and maybe I want down here. And by making an active region, by editing it, I can then set this a bit higher and see what the results are. So if I go up to 8 and 8, it's a bit high, but just to see if there's any differences. Down here, it's going to allow me to have a much quicker render time. Alright, so I see I really get no more bounce down in this region. So I don't feel that I need to make it that high. And I can compare against the two and really take a look and see if it feels like it's a better result. So I'm getting a lot more light up here with the 8 to decide whether or not it's worth the time. Okay. So that's our spec, taking a look at our indirect spec.